Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, November 4th. We begin tonight with a look at the economy, which seems to be doing good according to Statistics Canada. The federal agency says the economy did well in October, adding 108,000 jobs and reversing many of the losses from recent months. According to the agency's latest labor force survey, the unemployment rate held steady at 5.2% as more Canadians looked for work. Now, employment rose across a broad range of sectors. This was led by manufacturing, construction, and accommodation and food services. Wages continue to rise and were 5.6% higher than a year ago, but still falling short of inflation. Meanwhile, thousands of Ontario education workers are picketing across the province. This is in response to the Progressive Conservative government's imposition of a contract on union workers. The Ford government is taking a heavy-handed bargaining approach. It is also using the notwithstanding clause in the Charter of Rights to ban the 55,000 education workers from striking. Protesters gathered outside the provincial legislature, honking noisemakers, waving flags, and chanting, "Stand up, fight back." Now, this is the first day of an indefinite and illegal strike that has shut down many schools. Canadians expecting a GST rebate today can look forward to an additional lump sum payment. A bill introduced by the Liberal government to temporarily double the rebate comes into effect today. This was after it became law last month with unanimous support from opposition parties. The NDP has long advocated for the measure to help low and modest income Canadians cope with the rising cost of living. Inflation this year has reached levels not seen in 4 decades. This with the annual inflation rate hitting 6.9% in September. Associations representing Canada's doctors, nurses, and health organizations are calling for change amid a national healthcare crisis. They are asking governments to solve the issue that is affecting people across the country. The groups include the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Nurses Association, and Healthcare Can. They have issued a list of steps that governments should take to fix the country's healthcare system, dubbed the Prescription for Hope. The list includes recommendations, which include creating a pan-Canadian licensing model to allow doctors to work anywhere in the country. Turning now to the topic of reconciliation in Canada. An independent official was appointed by the federal government to help Indigenous communities access records and investigate unmarked graves at former residential school sites. And she says she is exploring options to probe possible crimes. Kimberly Murray says questions of justice are arising when she speaks to survivors and community leaders. The former executive director of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission plans to seek advice on investigative options that could include a special tribunal. Moving to an investigation that looks into where the $25 million raised by the Freedom Convoy last winter went. Now, most of the funds were either returned to donors or ended up in an escrow account awaiting the results of a civil lawsuit. The report was released yesterday by the public inquiry investigating the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act. It shows that only $1 million was actually spent by the convoy's various organizers. $18 million was refunded to donors. This while the remaining $6.2 million was confiscated and put into a fund pending civil court cases. To Western Canada now, where an Indigenous woman is suing an Edmonton hospital for discrimination and neglect. Pearl Gambler claims that when she delivered her daughter in 2020, nobody was there to help her. This was aside from a male nurse who watched her from a corner. The lawsuit claims the infant died soon after in a basket at a nursing station without a record of a time of death. On the East Coast, the PEI government says it is making its largest ever investment in social program benefits. Island households receiving social assistance or income benefits will see an 8% increase to their basic rate. As well, there will be increases to all shelter ceilings for social programs and social housing clients, and increases to communication, optical, and transportation benefits. The changes come into effect on December 1st. Several boats have become stuck in the port of Hay River, Northwest Territories in recent months, including a Canadian Coast Guard ship. Fishers, residents, and politicians say the problem stems from a lack of dredging. Now, this is a process that the federal government used to enact every year. Dredging removes excess mud, weeds, and rubbish from the bed of a river using a floating excavator. The dredging program dried up in 1997, but locals say that it could help resolve the issue. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Stay with us. Up now, we have Forum Daily's weekly energy update. We're joined by Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca.
Well, thank you, Nima. And again, another week has gone by. A lot of volatility in the markets, especially on the gasoline and, of course, the diesel front. We've been talking about diesel for the past little while. It looks like it's starting to make headlines, and that's because, of course, a severe shortage of diesel production. Nima, we've seen diesel as a fuel sort of get sidebarred. It's not considered that important, but it's a strategic commodity. And globally, it's the most important fuel that we have. And it, of course, is the global workhorse when it comes to our economy. So the fact that we've lost 3 refineries in eastern United States and Canada, 2 in Philadelphia, one which happened to be the largest one, now replaced, of course, by Irving, that is to say, in terms of its rank. And of course, the Come By Chance refinery in Newfoundland, there is every expectation that as winter begins to take its grip, we see cooler temperatures from what we've been accustomed to up until now. Not only will diesel prices skyrocket, they're likely to be in a situation where in many states in the US and perhaps affecting Atlantic Canada, we might see rationing. Until we get there, though, it's pretty clear that I've never seen what's called a crude to rack spread. And that's to say, if the cost of crude on a day like today, Nima, is about 76 cents a liter, diesel actually is getting $1.75. And that's not just true of Eastern Canada or Eastern United States. It's also now true of the US Midwest. And of course, that means as a consequence, the prairies. We're looking this week, therefore, for an average increase in diesel prices across Canada, about 10 cents a liter. So if you don't like the price you're seeing now, which is the 220 average, right across the country, look to at least 10 cents a liter between now and next week. Gasoline is on a tear, and it's going to continue to increase. We're seeing, of course, a bit of back and forth with a bit of a drop earlier this week. But when we saw gas prices shoot up a week and a half ago to the $1.75 range, looks like that's the new average for the country. I'm expecting gasoline will follow diesel and go up by about 5 cents a liter. So some regions of the country won't see it as much as others. We've seen a bit of a break in Vancouver where prices are in the $1.80 range, a lot better than the $2.40 range, which is where they were just a few weeks ago. For Western Canada, remaining in the $1.70 to $1.80. For Ontario, $1.75. Pushing to $1.80, Quebec pushing to $1.90 to $1.95, and the Maritimes pushing towards that $1.90, $1.92 range. What we're also looking at is the end of the U.S. government's use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. As that ends, we're already starting to see significant draws in the U.S. inventories of oil. That will only mean much higher prices for oil in the weeks to come. It's a bit of a head fake that the Biden administration chose unwisely to use up its emergency reserves rather than building a pipeline that would have delivered those reserves. We call that the Keystone XL pipeline. You all recall that on the first day of his administration, the Biden government killed the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have delivered to the American people and to the world the million barrels that it desperately needs so that countries like OPEC become less and less relevant. The idea of energy security, which is something that was very much prized on both sides of the border 10, 20, and 30 years ago, as we tried to wean ourselves away from dependency on shady dictatorships for our energy, our natural gas, and our oil. Looks like we're returning to those days, unfortunately, and the woke policies of the left, driven in this country to a large extent by liberals, New Democrats, and of course Greens, has left Canada in a very vulnerable and awkward position. Vulnerable in the sense that inflation is extraordinarily high. The Canadian dollar remains very weak. Prices for everything, not just diesel, but home heating fuel, jet fuel, the things that run our economy, gasoline, are now starting to spread and cascade into other parts of the economy. No one wants to talk about the elephant in the room. When you kill pipelines in this country, you wind up at some point seeing a lot of investment leave the nation, and a country that could be providing for the rest of the world just isn't. So that's sort of the narrative for this week, and it's going to continue to be more of a concern in the weeks to come. Nima, watch what happens in diesel, home heating fuel, and as a result, natural gas and propane will be in for the ride as well. So fasten your seatbelts, maybe take a second line of credit. As far as this winter is concerned, you ain't seen nothing yet. We'll talk next week, Nima. Back to you.
Always a lot to consider. Thanks for that, Dan. Again, that was Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. He's also the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All right, stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to be taking a look at the state of the crypto world. Catherine Murray joins us with Forum Daily's weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update. The host of The Buck Stops Here will give us her take on the latest developments in the rapidly evolving sector. So stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Up now, we have Forum Daily's weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing cryptocurrencies rally today. Bitcoin's up by about 2%, but interestingly, XRP as well as BNB are up by 8%. We have seen a little bit of volatility this week, of course, following the U.S. Federal Reserve raising rates by 75 basis points. That did send Bitcoin down by about 1% or so and below that $20,000 mark. We are, however, again, seeing a nice rally today with the total market cap of cryptocurrencies above that $1 trillion mark, finally, with cryptocurrencies up by about 7% week over week. I would, however, point out that volume is about 66% of the 30-day average. So in other words, there certainly still are a lot of participants that are sitting on the sidelines. In terms of further adoption of cryptocurrencies and digital assets, very interesting to see UBS issuing a 375 million Swiss franc digital bond offering. It is a senior unsecured with the same rights and legalities of a traditional bond. It's a 3-year term, 2.33% yield. And interestingly as well, it is apparently the world's largest digital bond offering, settling on both a digital exchange as well as a traditional Swiss exchange. We're also seeing Fidelity launching a new app for their retail clients that will allow retail clients to trade Bitcoin as well as Ethereum for commission free. But there's nothing free in life. And what you are seeing is that Fidelity will take a 1% spread. The assets will be custodied over at Fidelity Digital Assets. And we're also watching Goldman Sachs continue to move into the space. They're going to be working with index provider MSCI to classify digital assets, about 100 coins and digital assets of sorts, to try to make sense of what they are and what they are not, which will allow institutional investors to be able to analyze, benchmark, track, and record. The name is going to be Dataonomy, which is a play on taxonomy, which of course is the science to classify the natural world. Quite clever there. In terms of other news that we're keeping our eyes on, private equity firm Apollo Global Management, a giant within the space, is also expanding their crypto offering to clients. They're in fact going to be partnering or doing a bit of a deal with Anchorage Digital, which is a federally chartered crypto bank in the United States. Anchorage will be responsible for storing the majority of the digital assets. And so another interesting development from a private equity perspective as well. And just one follow-up in terms of the comments we had on Hong Kong last week that they're going to be moving into the digital space. They have laid out a master plan for being able to trade cryptocurrencies, as well as for the plan to allow exchange traded cryptocurrencies as well. Recall, they have to legalize this still. It had obviously been put to the side, but now they want to continue to be a huge financial player within the world, that of course being Hong Kong, which of course we've seen them have a big play as it relates to trading Asian assets, etc. So they're continuing to now move into that space. Just a bit of a follow up there. Also, Hydro Quebec has requested to stop providing energy to the blockchain industry. They have laid out their energy demand plans for the next 10 years, and they do see a 14% increase in demand. They're noting that they have very tight capacity, hence the request to not provide energy to the blockchain industry. And also Twitter, as we know, Elon Musk took over Twitter a week ago. He's been very busy making a lot of changes as to the CEO. And also, according to some reports, Bloomberg, in fact, they are saying that he plans to lay off one half of the employees. Well, we also know that he has been quite favorable towards cryptocurrencies, but he is reportedly halting work on the crypto wallet, which actually sent Dogecoin down by about 1%. Remember, he's been very positive with respect to that particular cryptocurrency. But perhaps right now he's has his hands full in terms of just right sizing Twitter in terms of how he wants to. So perhaps a little bit of a halt on the digital wallet that he's been planning. Nima, a lot going on as always. Those are some of the highlights of this week. I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. For more on the markets, you could always join Catherine Murray on The Buck Stops Here. It airs on Sundays at 9 a.m. Eastern only on the News Forum Network. Stay with us. Forum Daily will return in a moment with a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world, of course. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. South Korea has scrambled 80 military aircraft. This includes advanced F-35 fighter jets. The move comes after it tracked about 180 flights by North Korean warplanes inside North Korean territory. North Korea's mobilization appears to be a defiant show of strength. This comes as it fumes over ongoing joint exercises by hundreds of U.S. and South Korean military planes. The North test-fired around 30 ballistic missiles over the previous 2 days. Now, this includes an intercontinental ballistic missile that triggered evacuation warnings in Japan. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of engaging in energy terrorism. Now, this comes after Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy network. Millions of residents were left without power after the energy grid was targeted. Mr. Zelensky says the very fact that Russia is resorting to energy terrorism shows their weakness. This is because they cannot beat Ukraine on, quote, the battlefield. Top diplomats from the world's major industrialized democracies ended meetings in a unified position. Foreign ministers from the Group of Seven Nations wrapped up 2 days of talks on Friday. This was with a statement asserting common positions on Ukraine, Russia, China, and recent developments in Iran and North Korea. A year after warning Russia about the consequences of invading Ukraine, the G7 ministers endorsed further punishments for the Kremlin. This is including setting a price cap for Russian oil exports. The head of the European Central Bank is highlighting its determination to fight inflation with interest rate hikes. ECB President Christine Lagarde says efforts to lower inflation are far from being completed, and that even a mild recession would not be enough to bring price increases back under control. The bank has been raising rates at the fastest pace since the euro launched in 1999. This mirrors the hikes of the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. South of our border, American employers kept hiring at a brisk pace in October. They added a substantial 261,000 positions to the economy. As midterm election day grows near, the economy remains a picture of solid job growth and painful inflation. Today's government report shows that last month's hiring remained near the robust pace that it has maintained in the 2+ years since the pandemic recession ended. The U.S. unemployment rate rose to 3.7%, slightly increasing from a 5-decade low of 3.5%. Iran is marking the 1979 takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. This even as its theocracy faces nationwide protests after the death of a 22-year-old woman earlier arrested by the country's morality police. Iranian state-run television aired live feeds of various commemorations around the country on Friday. Meanwhile, Iran's hardline president continued his criticism of the demonstrations as backing Tehran's enemies. Nearby, thousands of cholera cases have swept across Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq in recent weeks. All three countries are struggling with crumbling healthcare and water infrastructure, turmoil, and housing displaced people. Now, that prevents an adequate response to the rapidly spreading disease. The outbreak marks a major setback for global efforts to eradicate cholera and reduce deaths related to the waterborne illness by 90% by 2030. The UN Children's Agency says it urgently needs over $40 million just for its work in Syria and Lebanon. Turning to a new report which says hundreds of animals have died in Kenyan wildlife preserves during East Africa's worst drought in decades. The Kenya Wildlife Service and other bodies counted the deaths of hundreds of animals. This includes elephants, zebras, giraffes, and wildebeests. Parts of Kenya have experienced 4 consecutive seasons with inadequate rain. The report released Friday says the worst affected areas include some of Kenya's most visited regions. 2 of Twitter Canada's most senior leaders are among the casualties as the social media giant began announcing global layoffs today. New owner Elon Musk didn't confirm or correct investor Ron Barron at a conference in New York. This was when he was asking the billionaire how much money he would save after he fired half of Twitter. Instead, he responded by talking about Twitter's ongoing cost and revenue challenges. The company had told employees by email that they would be laid off, but it did not say who or how many of Twitter's roughly 7,500 employees would lose their jobs. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.